more coveted than the Emperor's crown. The sword will unite us if it's held by a true Klingon.
I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers of Baltimore Knife and Sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, Reforged.
We've wanted to make a weapon from the Star Trek universe for a long time, guys. And we love a good challenge. So when looking through the different melee weapons throughout all the Star Trek universe, there really was only one obvious choice, the Sword of Kahless. This is the first ever Klingon Bat'leth, and it was said to have been forged by Kahless by taking a lock of his hair and putting in some lava. And as much as I would love to donate a lock of Ilya's hair to make the sword that way, that's not how we're gonna do it at all. As we see this sword in Deep Space Nine, it has a very unique pattern across the whole surface of the blade, much like pattern welded steel. So we're gonna attempt to make this Bat'leth completely out of pattern welded steel. We're gonna forge the whole thing. Of course, the easiest way to do it would be draw it up and have it plasma cut to shape, but that's not how you get the Sword of Kahless, and that's not how we're gonna make it. Let's get forging.
The boys went ahead and cleaned up the parts for our Damascus billet for our Bat'leth. Next thing is for me to stack them up in an alternating pattern, tack weld them together, and then we'll weld our handles on.
I have both of my Damascus billets for the Sword of Kahless. The next stage is to start forge welding them. I cannot start working both of them at the same time because that is simply too much material for a little forge over here.
Ilya is going to bring the stack up to temperature, forge weld it, and begin folding. Once he's reached a consolidated billet, he'll be able to pull the points out and make the locating sections that go to the front blade.
So obviously we haven't completed the forging on the first half of our blade, but it's time to now start adding in the pattern. Now normally when we've added pattern on the show, we actually cut into the material, removing material, and then you'll see us forge it back out flat to really capture that in the steel. In this case, we're gonna do the inverse. When Ilya was forging on the full-ring dies on our blades to stretch the material, he's actually added in a really nice chevron pattern up the blade, and you can see it's kind of rippled. What I'm gonna do is actually grind that back flat, and that'll capture that kind of pattern into the steel itself, leaving what we know as chatoyance, which is shadows within the steel. So I'm just gonna hand it off to Ilya, and he'll finalize the forging from there.
Now begins forging out the bladed section on this. He'll go through, draw one end out, check the lengths, draw out the other end. Now with both sections forged out, Ilya checks to make sure that these pieces make sense to each other. He has to make sure that the areas he needs to forge weld together line up directly so that the welds will take best.
All right, now our second blade is now forged. It's not completely forged because once again, we're gonna grind some pattern into it. Now one way to think about this is normally we grind little grooves or valleys into the material and then forge it out. In this case, I'm grinding the peaks down to the valleys that were forged in. Unlike the first blade, where I only had to grind away some of the blade portion, Ilya's used the fullering dies across the whole surface of this blade on both sides. So I actually have to remove the material on this entire piece and make sure that I leave enough material for Ilya to do the final forging.
After Matt has completed patterning the top of the Bat'leth, I'm going to stick it back in the forge and fine-tune my form. I have to work very precisely, as my alignment for attachment points is crucial.
Even though we haven't cleaned this weapon up yet or etched it, as things begin to oxidize in the forge as it heats up, you can see the pattern reveal itself. To achieve his final form, he begins using a top tool under the power hammer. He'll be able to draw out and smooth all the different surfaces as he works.
It's time to set up the attachment points for the forge welding. This is important if you're going to attempt to forge weld like this on your own. You cannot simply set up with a square point and expect a good weld. What you have to do is what I did here, make a sharp and a fairly steep bevel. This bevel produces the following effect. If your points are squared, your metal is like this. All the force here is directed completely down, so we'll start cutting in to the bearing surface. Now, if you create a taper like this, your surfaces will even out like so, producing a good forge weld.
There's one final bit of grinding that we have to do on these blades before we join them together as one, and that's to grind a little scoop on the back side of our central point. We could do this after welding, but it would be a real pain to get in there because it's a real tight space, so Ilya's just going to use the corner of the wheel and get the job done.
Now, before I start my forge welding, I have to clip off the excess from here and a little bit here. Normally that would not be necessary, but I'm going to play it safe. Using these excess pieces of Damascus, I'm going to flatten them out into patches that will go over my joining areas. That increases the thickness there and almost guarantees a very structural weld. I tack welded the two pieces together just to hold them in place before I forge weld. And the overlapping joints have been covered in borax. We'll heat up this area. Once it's up to welding heat, I will move to the anvil and gently set the weld by hand. After that, I'm going to switch, bring it up to heat, and set the weld by hand again. Once this is complete, I will let the piece entirely cool off while I'm working on the patches.
Now that Ilya has drawn out our material for our patches, he's going to use a hot cut tool and just cut two equal pieces. These will later be forge welded in place. It's now time to forge weld our Damascus patches to the rest of our Bat'leth. Ilya's going to heat up that specific area in the forge, move to the Bradley power hammer, and forge weld them all as one. We'll do this for a couple heats, just smoothing out that material, and every once in a while you're going to see him use a wire brush to remove the scale, just to make sure that there's no impurities in his weld. We have one final step to do in the grinding before we can do the final bit of forging on our Bat'leth sword. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna blend the seams right where Ilya added these patches, blending those seams is gonna allow him to forge it out seamless. So when I do my final grind and polish on this, you're not even gonna be able to tell that there was ever a patch added.
Ilya brings the Bat'leth up to temperature and forges the points to the proper form.
I'm gonna hold the piece while Ilya uses a hammer over the anvil to give him the final shape. After a huge amount of forging, it's finally in my hands to do the real blade grinding. I'm gonna crisp up all the lines along the entire perimeter, mainly on all the striking points. Then I have to define right in here and create an extra point that's not even here, and then we can finally move on to the edge grind. Well, hello there, number one. I have completed the perimeter grinding on our Bat'leth here. I now have a task that your very specific skill set will help me complete, and that is using the hand sander to get in here on all these inside scoops. Just clean everything up, make it nice and round, make it so.
This is a mission I'm ready for.
There's no need to completely heat treat this entire Bat'leth. We just need the striking points and the cutting blades to get hard. So Ilya heats those up and quenches them, and then places the blades back into the forge real quickly just to get a safe temper before flipping the blade and doing the other side.
Now that the bladed sections on this weapon are hardened, Matt begins to go through and polish each piece. He'll have to cover every surface since this piece will be etched to show the pattern welding. It's always a good idea when you're going to etch a large sword that you think about how you're going to etch it. If we had made this thing just a couple inches shorter, it would have laid down in this. Instead, Matt's going to have to really take a long time, spending a lot of time being very careful working over the acid over the surface. You've got to keep things moving because in something where you don't have a complete immersion, you can get a line. So he's going to work through this and keep moving both the acid and moving the object. Once he's satisfied with the etch, we're going to have to neutralize it to stop it from burning the surface. We'll go through, oil, polish, do the runes, set the handle, and this weapon will be done.
It was an amazing amount of work. Everything from the tricky forging to the massive amount of grinding. It took a lot of effort, but now that the build's complete, we've brought great honor upon the shop because we have built the Sword of Kahless.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.